Patrick stood at the kitchen window of the Fixer-Upper on Bayside Boulevard, watching his 7-year-old son Jeremy kick a soccer ball against the peeling fence. The house looked worse in daylight than it had during the viewing. Paint curling like dried leaves, porch sagging under the weight of neglect, windows so clouded with grime they barely let the morning sun through. It was perfect. Perfect because no one else wanted it. Perfect because it was cheap enough for a widower on a tight budget. Perfect because fixing broken things gave Patrick something to do with his hands when the grief became too heavy to carry in his chest alone. Natalie had been gone for 2 years now. Cancer had taken her slowly, then all at once, leaving Patrick with a first grader who still asked when Mommy was coming home, and a toolbox full of projects he'd never finished because he'd been too busy holding her hand in hospital rooms. The house on Bayside Boulevard was supposed to be a fresh start. A project big enough to drown out the silence, a place where maybe, just maybe, they could build something new from all the broken pieces. Patrick took a sip of lukewarm coffee and watched Jeremy chase the ball across the overgrown lawn. That's when he saw her. An elderly woman stood at the property line, her silver hair catching the light, one weathered hand resting on the crooked fence. She was talking to Jeremy. His son had stopped playing and was listening with that serious expression he got when adults told him things, the same look he'd worn at Natalie's funeral when people kept saying she was in a better place. Patrick's chest tightened. Stranger danger. How many times had he reminded Jeremy not to talk to people they didn't know? He set down his coffee and headed for the back door, but something made him pause. The woman wasn't moving closer. She was just standing there, talking softly, and Jeremy was nodding. Then, impossibly, the old woman smiled, a gentle, knowing smile, and handed Jeremy something small before turning and walking away down the cracked sidewalk. Patrick pushed through the door. Jeremy. Buddy, who was that? Jeremy looked up, clutching something in his small fist. A nice lady. She said she used to live here when she was little. What did she give you? Jeremy opened his hand. It was a key, old, brass, tarnished green at the edges, not a house key. Smaller, like the kind that might open a jewelry box or a diary. She said it belongs to the house, Jeremy explained, his eyes wide with the mystery of it. She said you'd know what to do with it when you found the place it fits. Patrick's jaw tightened. Did she say anything else? Just that. Jeremy scrunched his face, trying to remember. That every house remembers the people who loved it. And that you should look in the walls. That night, after Jeremy had fallen asleep, clutching his stuffed bear, Patrick sat at the kitchen table, turning the key over in his hands. The metal was cool and surprisingly heavy. Engraved on one side, almost worn smooth, were 2 initials, E.H. Look in the walls. It was the kind of thing you'd hear in a ghost story, not from a random elderly woman on a Tuesday morning. But something about it nagged at Patrick. He'd been planning to start demo work on the master bedroom anyway. The wallpaper was water-damaged and peeling, and the plaster underneath had that soft, concerning feel that meant problems. Might as well start there. He grabbed his toolbox and a flashlight, climbed the stairs, and stood in the empty bedroom. It was the room he'd been avoiding, the room that was supposed to become his, but still felt too big, too quiet, too full of the ghost of what a master bedroom was supposed to be, a place shared. Patrick pushed the thought away and wedged his pry bar behind a loose section of wallpaper. The paper came away in long, satisfying strips, revealing layers beneath, decades of different patterns, different lives, different families who'd painted over their predecessors. Beneath it all was old horsehair plaster, cracked and crumbling. He worked for an hour, pulling away the damaged sections, until his pry bar hit something that didn't sound like plaster. Wood. Patrick's pulse quickened. He cleared away more debris until he found it. A small wooden panel, barely 2 feet square, set into the wall between the studs. It wasn't part of the original construction. Someone had added it later, fitted it carefully, hidden it behind layers of wallpaper and time. The panel was held in place by a small brass lock. Patrick's hand went to his pocket. The key felt warm now, as though it had been waiting 50 years for this exact moment. It fit perfectly. The panel swung open on hinges that barely squeaked, revealing a shallow cavity. Inside was a metal box, the kind that might have held important documents. Patrick lifted it out carefully, surprised by its weight, and carried it downstairs to the kitchen table. Jeremy's soccer ball sat by the back door. The house creaked and settled around him. Patrick opened the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Beneath them a stack of photographs, black and white, edges soft with age. A young couple, maybe in their 20s, standing in front of this very house. The woman was beautiful, dark hair and bright eyes, laughing at something outside the frame. The man beside her looked at her the way Patrick used to look at Natalie, like she was the only real thing in the world. Patrick untied the ribbon with careful fingers and unfolded the first letter. "My dearest William, I know you think I'm being silly, hiding these letters away like buried treasure, but there's something about writing things down that makes them real, makes them last. You say I don't need to tell you these things because you already know, but I want our future selves to remember. Remember the way you looked at me when we bought this house. Remember that we were so poor, we ate canned soup for 6 months to save for the down payment. Remember that we promised, no matter what, we'd fill these rooms with love. The walls will remember us, William, long after we're gone. All my love, Eleanor, Eleanor." E.H. Patrick's throat went tight. He reached for the next letter, and the next, reading through the chronicle of a life lived in these rooms. Eleanor and William had been young and struggling, but their letters were full of hope. They wrote about painting the kitchen yellow because it reminded Eleanor of sunshine, about planting rose bushes that never quite took, about fights over money and making up on the sagging porch, about dreams of children who never came. The later letters grew heavier with a different kind of weight. "My darling William, the doctors say there's nothing more they can do. I'm not afraid of dying, but I'm afraid of leaving you alone in this house we filled with so much love. I'm afraid you'll rattle around in these rooms like a ghost, forgetting how to live. Promise me something. Promise me that when I'm gone, you won't let the grief wall you in. Promise me you'll let someone else love you, even if it feels like betrayal. Promise me you'll remember that love doesn't end, it just changes shape. This house was built for love, William. Don't let it become a tomb." Forever yours, Eleanor. Patrick had to stop reading. His vision had blurred. His hands were shaking. This was grief, naked and raw, written in careful cursive on yellowing paper. This was a woman who knew she was dying, trying to save the man she loved from drowning in loss. He knew that drowning. He'd been underwater for 2 years. Patrick wiped his eyes and reached for the photographs again. There, in one of the later photos, he saw it. The same elderly woman who'd stood at his fence that morning, only younger, maybe in her 60s. She stood in front of the house with a man who must have been William, both of them older now, weathered by time but still holding hands. On the back, in faded ink, Eleanor and William, 40th anniversary, 1983. But Eleanor had written about dying. How could she be in a photo from 1983? Patrick flipped through the remaining letters faster now, searching. And then he found it. A letter in different handwriting, masculine and shaky. "To whoever finds this, my name is William Harrison. I lived in this house for 52 years with my wife Eleanor. She died in 1962. I was 43 years old and certain my life had ended with hers. But Eleanor knew me better than I knew myself. She knew I'd try to build walls around the grief. She knew I'd turn this house into a shrine, so she wrote me letters, dozens of them, and hid them throughout the house. Every time I tried to change something, every time I tried to pack up her things or paint over the memories, I'd find another letter. Another reminder that she wanted me to keep living. It took me 3 years to find them all. By then, I'd started talking to a woman named Margaret who worked at the library. By then, I'd learned Eleanor was right. Love doesn't end. It just changes shape. I lived a full life after Eleanor. I married Margaret. We were happy, but I never forgot my first love, and I never stopped being grateful that she loved me enough to set me free. If you're reading this, it means someone new is bringing life back to these walls. Someone who needs to know what I learned. Grief is just love with nowhere to go. But these old houses, they're good at holding love. They're good at keeping it safe until you're ready to feel it again. Build something beautiful here. Let the walls remember you too. William Harrison. Patrick sat in the quiet kitchen, holding a dead man's letter, and felt something crack open in his chest. He'd spent 2 years trying to hold himself together, trying to be strong enough for Jeremy, trying to keep going through the mechanical motions of life without Natalie. He'd bought this broken house because fixing it felt safer than fixing himself. But grief wasn't something you fixed. It was something you carried, something you learned to live alongside. The walls will remember us. He thought about Eleanor, writing letters to a future she'd never see, trying to save her husband from the prison of grief. He thought about William, finding those letters one by one, learning slowly that living wasn't a betrayal of the dead. He thought about the woman at the fence, not Eleanor, who died in 1962, but probably Margaret, William's second wife, who'd loved this house enough to care about who lived here next. Someone who'd seen a grieving father and a little boy, and knew somehow what they needed to find. The next morning, Patrick stood on the porch with Jeremy, holding a cup of coffee and watching the sunrise paint Bayside Boulevard in shades of gold. The house still needed work, months of it, maybe years, but it didn't look quite as broken as it had yesterday. "Dad?" Jeremy leaned against his leg. "Are you going to fix the fence today?" "Maybe. Or maybe we'll start with the porch. Make it safe so we can sit out here in the evenings. Can we paint the kitchen yellow?" Patrick looked down at his son. "Why yellow?" Jeremy shrugged. "It's a happy color. Mom liked happy colors." Something warm and painful expanded in Patrick's chest. "Yeah, she did. Yellow sounds perfect." They stood there together, the weight of Jeremy pressed against his side, and Patrick felt it, the first small shift. Not moving on, because that phrase had always felt wrong, like leaving Natalie behind, but moving forward, carrying her with them, letting the grief change shape into something they could hold alongside the love. "Jeremy, the lady who gave you the key, did she tell you her name?" Jeremy thought for a moment. "Mrs. Harrison. She said Mr. Harrison used to live here, and he'd want us to be happy." Patrick smiled despite the sting in his eyes. "I think he would." A car drove slowly past, and Patrick caught a glimpse of silver hair, a gentle wave through the window. Margaret Harrison, keeping watch over the house that had held so many versions of love. The house that remembered. "Come on, buddy. Let's make some breakfast, and then we'll start making this place ours." They went inside, leaving the door open to let the spring air sweep through the empty rooms. Patrick could already imagine it. The kitchen painted yellow like sunshine, the porch rebuilt and sturdy, furniture that would bear the marks of their life. Jeremy's height measured year by year on the doorframe, new memories layering over old ones, not erasing them, but building something larger, something that held space for both grief and joy. That afternoon, Patrick hung Eleanor's photograph in the kitchen, Eleanor and William, young and hopeful in front of the house that would hold their love. He tucked William's final letter into a frame beside it. "Who are they?" Jeremy asked, standing on a chair to see better. The people who loved this house before us. They wanted us to know that even broken things can hold something beautiful. Is that why you bought a broken house? So we could fix it? Patrick lifted Jeremy down from the chair and held him close. Yeah, buddy, that's exactly why. But what he didn't say, what he was only beginning to understand, was that he hadn't just bought a broken house to fix. He'd bought it to teach him that broken things could still be whole. That loving again wasn't forgetting. That you could honor the past while building toward the future. That grief was just love with nowhere to go, until you made new places for it. Over the following weeks, Patrick worked on the house with a different energy. He stripped wallpaper and found, in random places, more small treasures. A child's marble, a woman's hairpin, a recipe card for apple pie written in Eleanor's careful script. Each discovery felt like a blessing, a reminder that these walls had held life and would again. Jeremy helped where he could, handing Patrick tools, painting wobbly stripes on the fence, planting flowers in the front yard that may or may not survive his enthusiastic watering. They worked side by side, talking about school and soccer and sometimes, carefully, about Natalie. "Do you think Mom would like the yellow kitchen?" Jeremy asked one evening, his small hand leaving prints in the fresh paint. "I think she'd love it," Patrick said, and meant it. "I think she'd love seeing us build something together." Mrs. Harrison said the walls remember people who love the house. Will the walls remember Mom, even though she never lived here? Patrick set down his brush and knelt beside his son, not caring about the paint on his knees. "Yeah, Jeremy, because we're bringing her with us. Every choice we make, every room we fix up, it's all part of carrying her love forward. That's what people do when they lose someone. They find ways to keep the love alive." Jeremy considered this with the seriousness only a 7-year-old could muster. Then he nodded and went back to painting, leaving small yellow handprints along the baseboard, like a signature. 3 months later, the house on Bayside Boulevard had transformed. Not completely, there was still work to do, always work to do, but it no longer looked abandoned. The porch was sturdy, the windows sparkled, the yellow kitchen glowed with warmth. Roses that Patrick had planted, in honor of Eleanor's failed attempts, were actually blooming. Patrick had framed several of Eleanor's letters and hung them throughout the house, not as decorations but as reminders. Reminders that love persisted, that healing was possible, that grief could coexist with joy. One Saturday afternoon, as Patrick was replacing a broken step on the front porch, a car pulled up to the curb. Margaret Harrison climbed out slowly, and Patrick set down his hammer to meet her at the gate. "Mrs. Harrison." She smiled, the same gentle, knowing smile she'd worn when she'd handed Jeremy the key. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to see what you'd done with the place. Please, come in." He walked her through the house, showing her the restored rooms, the yellow kitchen, the photographs and letters he'd preserved. Margaret's eyes grew bright with tears. "William would be so happy," she said softly. "He always said this house had good bones, that it just needed people who could see past the broken parts." They stood in the kitchen, afternoon light streaming through the clean windows. "Mrs. Harrison, can I ask you something? How did you know? How did you know I needed to find those letters?" Margaret was quiet for a moment, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "Because I saw myself in you. When William and I met, he was still so lost in grief. Still building walls, but Eleanor, she was smarter than both of us. She knew that grief needed an escape route, a way forward that didn't feel like abandonment. The letters. The letters, Margaret agreed. They gave him permission to keep living, and when I saw you and your son, I recognized that look, that heaviness. I thought maybe—" She smiled. "Maybe the walls had one more thing to teach." Patrick swallowed hard. "Thank you for the key, for caring about who came next." This house deserves people who understand what it means to love something broken and make it whole again. She patted his hand. You're doing that, not just with the house. After Margaret left, Patrick stood in the yellow kitchen and let himself feel it. All of it. The grief that had made a home in his bones. The love that had never left, only changed shape. The gratitude for a woman who died before he was born, but had somehow reached across decades to offer him the exact wisdom he needed. The walls will remember us. Yes, Patrick thought, they would. They'd remember Natalie and every careful choice he made, every lesson he taught Jeremy, every moment of joy they built in these rooms. They'd remember Eleanor and William, whose love had been strong enough to save a man from drowning decades later. They'd remember that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about making space for new growth without destroying the roots. That evening, Patrick and Jeremy sat on the restored porch, watching fireflies drift across the yard. "Dad?" Jeremy leaned against him. "I'm glad we moved here." "Yeah? Why's that?" "Because it feels like home now, like a place where happy things can happen." Patrick wrapped his arm around his son, feeling the weight of him, solid and real and growing every day. "Yeah, buddy, me too." The house settled around them, old wood creaking softly, holding the weight of all the lives that had passed through it. Holding Eleanor's laughter and William's grief and Margaret's second-chance love. Holding Natalie's memory and Jeremy's handprints and Patrick's slowly healing heart. And in that moment, sitting on a porch he'd built with his own hands in a house that had taught him how to live again, Patrick understood what William had tried to say in his letter. Grief was just love with nowhere to go. But these old houses, they were good at holding love. They were good at keeping it safe until you were ready to build something new. So let me ask you, where are you watching this from tonight? Are you sitting in a home that holds memories, good and difficult? Have you ever found something unexpected that changed how you saw your own story? This story is about many things, grief and healing, second chances and the marks we leave behind. But mostly, it's about understanding that broken things can still be whole, that loving again doesn't erase who we've loved before, that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let ourselves build something new from the pieces. If this story touched you in any way, if it made you think about the walls that hold your own memories, or if Patrick and Jeremy's journey reminded you that healing is possible, leave a comment below. Tell me what lesson you're carrying forward from their story. Tell me if you've ever had to learn that grief is just love with nowhere to go, and how you found new places for it. And if you believe in stories that heal, that remind us we're not alone in our broken places, that show us how to carry love forward even through loss, hit that like button and subscribe. Because every week, we share stories about gentle souls, rebuilding lives one careful choice at a time, about finding hope in unexpected places, about learning that the best things we can build are built from truth, patience, and open hearts. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, whatever you're carrying, whatever walls you're building or tearing down, you're not alone in it. We'll see you in the next story.